If you've been interested in ditching diets and finding a more sustainable, holistic, and gentle approach to nutrition, then I have the perfect book that I think you're gonna absolutely love. Today, I wanted to share with you the new book that Evelyn Tribole came out with. It's called Intuitive Eating for Every Day, 365 Daily Practices and Inspirations to Rediscover the Pleasures of Eating. So let's hop more into this book, the price, the pros, some of the small cons, and then also who is this book really made for. Starting off with, it's a fairly affordable book coming at around $15 to $17 on Amazon. If you have heard of intuitive eating, then you've probably heard of Evelyn Tribole. She is one of the co-writers of the original intuitive eating book that came out in 1995. It's been around for quite a while, but they've done some revamping since their original book, so it is up to date on some of the more nuanced things within the book. If you haven't read it already, I definitely recommend it, and I will leave it in the description box below along with this book too, because I think they're both worth the read. And for those of you who are not totally familiar with intuitive eating, I want to give a little bit of a background before I go into the meat of this book, because I think it does provide some context to who this book would benefit and why it might be beneficial for you. So intuitive eating is a evidence-based mind and body health approach comprised of 10 principles created by two dietitians, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. It's a weight-neutral approach with over 90 studies to back it. Intuitive eating is a dynamic integration between the mind and the body. The principles work by either cultivating or removing obstacles to body awareness, a process known as interoceptive awareness. Essentially, intuitive eating is the personal process of honoring your health by listening to and responding to your body and its direct messages to meet your physical and physiological needs. So all of those fancy words to say, intuitive eating is a gentle approach to nutrition. There's no restrictions, there's no foods that you have to limit. You are essentially listening to your body and ditching the diet mentality. So let's get more into the breakdown of this book. So this book isn't just a book that you read front to back, it's actually kind of like a calendar. It reminds me of a calendar that it has specific days of the week, starting day 1 to 365, so you can read one per day or do kind of like I do and read a couple per day. And that's just kind of the approach that I like to take with it because it's so engaging that I want to read more, but I don't want to overdo it because I want to actually absorb these concepts. But essentially it works kind of like an inspirational calendar where you read the day's a little excerpt. And for example, just looking at day 12. Loving boundaries is the topic. It talks about the importance of setting boundaries. So this one in particular is about how important boundaries are to getting away from using dieting tools and embracing that intuition of yours. Intuitive eating has 10 basic principles that make up intuitive eating and kind of help guide you through it. So how this book is laid out is that it covers all 10 principles within the book. Principle 1 will be like page 1 through 42, and then principle 2 will be the next 40 pages or so, give or take, and then principle 3 will be the next one. So to review the 10 principles within the book, days 1 through 41 are rejecting the diet mentality. Days 43 through 77 are honoring your hunger. Part 3 is making peace with food. Part 4 is challenging the food police. Part 5 is the satisfaction factor. 6 is feel your fullness. 7, cope with emotions without using food. Part 8 is respect your body. Part 9 is movement, feel the difference. And part 10 is honoring your health with gentle nutrition. With that, these sections are broken into little subsections, which include weekly intentions, affirmations, meal meditations, setting boundaries, like the one example that I gave, self-compassion exercises, and elevating self-trust. And those are just a few. There are several more categories within the whole book, but those are just some examples of the exercises that you might expect to find within those categories. And I just love that there are tangible tips within this book. That's what I think is the biggest value proposition from this book, is the fact that you can actually apply and do these exercises pres in the moment. So now I want to talk about the pros of this book and why I highly recommend this book and love it. First, I love that it is from two dietitians. You can't really beat that. And you know that you're getting trustworthy information from Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. They are the original creators of intuitive eating. So I really love that because I know that I can trust that the information about intuitive eating is solid, because unfortunately people can mask intuitive eating by using it for dieting. So people can say that intuitive eating can be used in diet culture messages. So that can really get conflicting and confuse the general public with what intuitive eating actually means, which is honoring your health and honoring your body's hunger and fullness cues, which is something that you cannot do if you're also dieting. So that can get really hairy and really confusing. And I love that I can count on this information being totally solid. I also love that it gives tangible affirmations, tangible mantras, and kind of gives a language to kind words that you can say to your body. I know this has been a long journey for myself with food and with loving my body and learning self-love and self-care. And sometimes I feel like I've gotten so much of the dialogue of dieting that I don't know how to treat my body well, if that makes sense, or I don't know how to affirm myself that I'm doing a good job, or what daily mantras I can say to myself to kind of build myself up and build up that confidence. And I love that this book gives more dialogue and more language to how I can speak to myself in a kind and loving way, because unfortunately that's just not always super common for us nowadays, is it? I really love that it helps build the introspective awareness that they talk about, which is just a fancy word for how to look inward and how to truly assess what is my hunger, what is true hunger, what is emotional hunger, what is true fullness, and how can I honor my body, embrace that interoceptive awareness that I talked about at the beginning. I know that's a kind of a fancy word for just saying how to listen to your body in an intuitive way and honor what it actually needs, versus listening to maybe a diet plan or a book that's telling you exactly what to eat and not really taking into account how active you are, how tall you are, how large or small you are. And those things are so important, because everyone's needs are just a little bit different. And I think if we all try to squeeze into this one size fits all mold, that we're gonna ultimately just lose touch with our body's natural cues. What I also love about this book is that it's broken up into little chunks. So if you just wanted to read one little excerpt per day, you could totally do that, and you'd have a fun activity to do each day of the year. And that's kind of how you're supposed to do it. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself and reading through the whole thing just because I love all the tips and I really want to read them all through before making this review. But I definitely plan to go back through this book and do it more slowly, kind of how it was designed to, because I think that'll really help to absorb each and every practice or exercise that this book has. And one thing that I do to help remind myself to read is to set a timer Monday through Friday, or whatever works for you. You can do it on the weekends, to read a page or two out of this book. And that just helps set my routine and set my intention for the day to get some of these affirmations in my mind first thing in the morning. As for the cons or the caveats to this book, I really don't have a whole lot of cons. This is a great book, and I think just all around, she has some great things to say, some great practices to include in your day. But I will say one thing to keep in mind is that this is not like a front to back, read it kind of book. This is not the intuitive eating manual. So if you really want to get that baseline knowledge of what intuitive eating is, I highly recommend reading her book. And I also highly recommend one of her podcasts that I recently listened to on intuitive eating. It is on the 10% Happier podcast. It's such a great listen. It's an hour and a half, but the time flew by because it's just so informative and such a good explanation of intuitive eating as a whole. So I will also leave a link to that because I highly recommend that as well if you don't, want to read, or if you prefer podcasts over books. I absolutely highly recommend that. But just to kind of give that insight, this is a book that you could technically read by itself, but I do recommend having that baseline knowledge of intuitive eating to really get the most out of it. The other caveat that I will say, and this is just kind of like a side note, it's not really anything against the book itself, is that if you are struggling with your relationship with food, unfortunately, a book alone is not always the best solution. Sometimes what we need is a a book or a workbook and a therapist or a dietitian who is well versed in intuitive eating. I do coach a select few one-on-one clients, so if you're interested, I have an application in the description box below. But I highly recommend doing the work with a dietitian and therapist and also doing it alongside this book, because as with any book, as with anything like a self-help book, the book alone is not always enough. Sometimes you need to talk it through and really have someone who is going to hold you accountable for that. So at very minimum, have a friend that can help hold you accountable or a family member. But if you can afford it, I really highly recommend investing in a dietitian or a therapist or both so that you can get the absolute most out of the information that you read. And just to cover a little bit about who exactly this book is for. This book is for anyone who wants to have a healthier relationship with food. It's also for anyone who has a past history of an eating disorder, or maybe you're still struggling with some of the symptoms of an eating disorder. Again, I would highly recommend having a therapist and dietitian on board, but this is a good supplementary book to help you incorporate that self-care and self-practice and to always be providing those positive mantras in your life, because Lord knows those of us who have struggled with any kind of disordered eating, we really need those reminders to treat ourselves well and to fuel our bodies, and that it's really not wrong to eat more some days, less other days, and to have that ice cream or have that salad. Hey, intuitive eating is not about just eating donuts. It's about listening to your body. So regardless of whether that's a salad or a donut or a pizza or whatever it is, it's all about listening to what your body actually needs. Another reason to get this book is if you want tangible ways to be more mindful with food. As I mentioned, there's tons of mindfulness meditations and meditations that you can do during eating or before or after eating. I think that part is really cool. This book is also for anyone who wants to ditch the diet mentality and ditch diets for good and actually embrace the intuitive eating approach. Who is this book not for? Well, this book can be honestly for anyone, but one thing that I will say is if dieting is still deeply a part of your life and you're not really ready to give that up, then I would recommend coming back to this book another time. If you're wanting a nutrition or health book that is more macro focused or calorie focused, or you want to be told exactly what to do with your diet, then this book is probably not for you. And there's no shame if that's your truth right now, but I do highly recommend coming back to this book in a future time where you feel like you are ready to listen to your body versus listening to kind of a 101 guide that tells you exactly what to eat, because I promise you, intuitive eating will help you listen to your body so that you know what's right for you. And that might be really uncomfortable to think about, or kind of feel like you're going into the unknown and you're not sure if this is the right thing for you, and that's totally fine. But I recommend coming back to intuitive eating when you feel ready and kind of ready to entrench yourself into the journey of intuitive eating, because there are some parts that are very uncomfortable and some parts that force you out of your comfort zone. So if that's something that you're not quite ready for, then that might be the only reason that I would say come back to it at a different time. But again, I think this book would be great for anybody in helping to make peace with food and have a healthier relationship with food. Thank you so much for joining me for this book review. I highly recommend looking in the description box to purchase the intuitive eating book if you haven't already. And I will also leave a link to this book if you would like to purchase it with my affiliate link. I do get a very small commission from the affiliate links, but it does not cost you any more to use those links, so use them if you would like. And leave any types of ideas or things that you'd like me to talk about in a future video in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.